So Dennis, exam grades have been around for a very long time. People trust them, people use them. They're the passport to university, to the world of work, to all sorts of things. What's the problem?
Yeah, everything, Sarah, you say is true, but there is a big problem. They're neither reliable nor trustworthy. I really regret to say to everyone watching this that on average, about 1 grade in every 4 is wrong and has been wrong for years. There was obviously an interruption in 2020 and 2021 with COVID and all of that, but whilst exams were taking place in the 2010s and now they're back in 2022, 1 grade in 4 is wrong.
So when we say wrong, are you talking about the fact that many young people on a particular exam day will have an off day? And if they were to take that self-same paper on a different occasion, that their mark actually might be different? Or are you referring to something much deeper and more systemic as a problem?
It's definitely deeper and more systemic. You're absolutely right, Sarah. There are all sorts of circumstances where I might perform differently on a different day or with a different exam paper, or, if the dog hadn't been sick and all of that stuff. This one is much deeper. This says, I've done my script, it's gone in to be marked, but different examiners can give different marks resulting in different grades. So it's nothing to do with me or my performance, it's the lottery of which examiner happened to mark the script.
I thought the exam boards had fairly careful moderation processes in place, which meant that the marking was checked and that samples were taken to ensure that standards were the same for any particular given paper.
There is great quality control. The way quality control works is that if, for example, I am a regular examiner, I will have a mark scheme, and that will tell me the marks I can give to a particular question. But you're a historian, as you know. If I was marking a history essay, there's a range of marks that I might give, and I use my professional judgment to say 13 out of 20 or whatever. Now, you as a senior examiner will look over my shoulder from time to time as I do the marking. And there is a concept called tolerance, which says that if my mark is close to the mark that you as a senior examiner might give, that's okay. But if it's outside tolerance, then you will have a word with me. So there's this sort of fuzziness is built into the quality control, which is totally legitimate because we all know that different experts can have different opinions. But let's aggregate that up to the whole paper. Let's suppose that my paper was marked 64 out of 100, say, and that corresponds to grade B. Another examiner might have marked my script and given it 66. Now, if the grade boundary just happens to end up at 65, one examiner will give me a B, another totally legitimately qualified, totally expert examiner will give me 66 grade A, and that's the problem.
Because the grades aren't necessarily put up, because that's within the tolerance band, is that what you're saying? So therefore the mark will remain at 64 because there's not enough of a move to push it up into the next grade.
The mark is 64, and that's the mark that is mapped onto the grade scale grade B. Hypothetically, had another examiner marked my script, they might have given me 66 grade A. So the grade depends on the lottery of which examiner did the marking, and it also depends on this intrinsic fuzziness of scripts, and that varies by subject. In a subject like maths, the fuzziness is pretty narrow, maybe a mark or 2 either way. In a subject like geography, it's quite a lot broader. In history, I'm afraid it's the biggest, and it could be as much as 10 marks either
10
way.
marks?
Yeah, which is 2 or 3 grade boundaries.
So what's to be done?
Well, there are a variety of things that can be done. To my mind, the most pragmatic and the most real is to throw grades away. Grades have got these grade edges, cliff edges. If you're at 64, it's one grade. If you're at 66, it's another, and it's a cliff in between. The reality is not like that. So why not throw grades away, for example, and instead of having grade B, grade A, you say my mark was 64, which is what it is, but for history, the range of fuzziness, as I call it, might be plus or minus 10 marks. So my certificate shows 64, fuzziness 10 for history. Maths might be 72, fuzziness 2. So we just have to get used to a different way of looking at certificates, which is much more real, because there is no difference in a history test, as you would know, between 64 and 66. But if that's over a cliff edge grade boundary, it makes all the difference in the world. Now, that's just one way of doing it. There are, in principle, many others, and something needs to be done to choose the best and implement it. That happens to be the one I like best.
How do you think universities and employers would look upon a fuzzy certificate which has a mark on it rather than the grades that they're used to?
That's a very sensible question. Grades are currently used by universities, but one of the rules that a university will have is that all grade A is good and the same, all grade B is bad and the same. And the fact is that a top B and a bottom A are much closer than, the top A and the top B. So it's a very, very flawed decision-making mechanism to use that cliff edge as a decider. Now, it makes life easy because I can just go through and put them in two piles. To my mind, the purpose of exams is not to give university admissions officers an easy life. If they have to think a bit harder and do a bit more work and maybe interview the candidates or look at context, because there is no difference between 64 and 66 in an exam which has fuzziness of 10. So I'm sorry, universities, please think harder.
So what would you now advise Ofqual to do?
Nothing, please. But I would advise other people to do something very important. In my recent book, I've identified 14 possible ways of addressing this problem, which with the status quo gives 15. There are probably others as well that I haven't spotted. So I think that a feasibility study should be carried out, which firstly identifies all possibilities, and I've got 15 on the table to start with, let's get some more, and then very, very wisely evaluate that, and to choose the one which actually works the best, including maintaining the status quo, if that's what happens. I don't think it will, but it's there. However, I do not trust Ofqual to do that. They have vested interests in this. They've known about this for a long time and they've chosen not to do it. So surprise, surprise, they would come up with maintaining the status quo, perhaps. An independent body, I believe, should be set up to do that. And there are several on the table right now who would be, to my mind, quite eligible. So, for example, the Times Education Commission already exists and has been thinking about these things. The Rethinking Assessment community. There are various communities out there that already exist. But some wise people need to come together thoughtfully and be very sensible in choosing the best. Ofqual need to be party to it. But I'm afraid, having seen some of the stuff that Ofqual did in consultation, changing the appeals system in 2016, let alone the decision to introduce the algorithm in 2020, it should be done by other people.
So without changing the assessment regime, nonetheless, a quite substantial reform to the way we look at examinations.
Absolutely. There's a huge amount that I believe should be done to reform assessment. The curriculum, fairness, how technology is used, and they're all important and they need to do, but they're going to take time. So fixing reliable grades on the basis of exams as they exist now, carried out as they exist now, is something that could be done for the summer of 2023 if people got their act together. And it's just the first step along that reform path. But currently, unreliable grades does colossal damage to very, very many students. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be fixed now, and it's the first step on a much richer path.
Thank you, Dennis.
My pleasure.